Uh, hey, boring. What's up? It's the culture detective here, living the most boring life in the world and investigating your favorite albums. And today I'm going to do an album review on the latest Nicolas Jaar album, Telas. So, Nicolas Jaar is one of the best electronic artists of the past decade, in my opinion, dropping amazing albums left and right. And he also dropped a couple micro house albums under the name of Against All Logic, or AAL, and the album 2012 to 2017 became one of my favorite electronic albums of the past decade. But also, he dropped 2017 to 2019 earlier on this year, and while it's a more experimental version, it's less catchy, but it's still super captivating and engaging, and the sound play is fantastic. But Nicolas Jaar, he doesn't stop there. Under his own name, he dropped an ambient record earlier this year as well called Cenizas. And while it is only an ambient record, it is, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, ambient records I've heard all year so far, because that's actually the only ambient record I've heard all year. But it was fantastic nonetheless. The sound play is extremely surreal. It also sounds extremely interesting and colorful and strange. And there are all these different tracks that have so much emotions and moods and tones and timbre sort of hidden within them. It's actually very beautiful. But who would have thought that he would have dropped a third record, Telas? And similar to Cenizas, Telas is an ambient record, but the difference is that this album sounds more like a bunch of leftovers for Cenizas than it is actually another ambient record, like a sequel of sorts. It really feels like a bunch of leftovers, sort of thinly stringed together. Also, there are only 4 tracks on this album. It's sort of like, Godspeed's Lift Your Skinny Fists. 4 gigantic tracks. Each track ranges from 12 minutes to like 15, 16. And yeah, I'm not too crazy about this album. This album is so much more indulgent and it feels so much more disjointed. Again, if you go back to Cenizas, you'd see that there are many different tracks, and each track ranging from 3 to 6 minute long, and each track has a central tone, has a central mood, has a central atmosphere, has the same few instrumentals. However, that's not really the case for Telas. It's so much less focused for Telas. So honestly, it's not that great of an album in my opinion. The first track, Telahumo, has these spluttery, sporadic percussion, which sounds really interesting. Also, these swirly electronics, bold horns. It's off to a very interesting start. However, given that a lot of the instrumentals sound interesting, it doesn't mean that they're well arranged together into something solid or cohesive. Anyways, up next we have these shimmery, bright synths, and then it would fall completely into this stark, empty silence. And then suddenly these Chinese flavored strings, maybe it's a pipa, no one really knows. They would slightly sort of fade into the song, and then they would fade out, and then we would get these prickly Nicolas Jaar-esque electronics, and then these whispers in the background, and that's basically the first track. Yeah, a lot of interesting sounds, but are they strung together in a cohesive and also appealing way? Not really. The second track, Telensima, has these weepy keyboards and these really beautiful, dense layers of reeds, which I really, really love. And then, once again, it quiets down. Silence. And then these very beautiful glittery keyboards sort of dripping down in a really watery, beautiful fashion. And it sounds incredibly interesting until it falls into silence again. And then afterwards, these really crazy, weird sliding keyboards. Maybe there's a theremin involved. I don't know. And then these very abrasive, very distorted, scratchy electronic tones, and that is basically the second track. Again, there are some moments in this track that feels really interesting, but in the full picture, not really. Up next, we have the third track, Telahumo, and it's probably the best track among the four. It's certainly a little more focused, even though there are still a few moments of silence here and there. But also the sounds, all the passages of instrumentals on this track are the most interesting sounding ones. Again, glitchy percussion, which is always a very Nicolas Jaar thing. Also, very atmospheric, moody keyboards in the beginning, which really sets the tone. And then afterwards, these very driving, repetitive, cycling rhythms, as well as grooves, which is very rare in this album. In fact, this is the only moment in the entire album where there is a resemblance of a rhythm or a groove, so it immediately catches my attention. And then these glossy synths and also a bit of a synth solo towards the end, which doesn't sound all that groundbreaking or anything, but the vocal effects, or more like the sound effects, and how the synths are processed, they are just really surreal and strange. Also, these haunting vocals, it almost like this comes out of a soundtrack from a sci-fi movie in the future, and it just sounds really interesting. The last track, being Telallás, is definitely not the best track on the album, maybe the least interesting to me. It really sounds like Nicolas Jaar is running out of ideas at this point. However, this track is also probably the most focused track on the entire album. We get these very consistent tapping percussion throughout the entire track. Also, these very deep-pitched strings, which sounds like a specific Chinese instrument where you tap on it with a stick and it goes bong. And that, it reminds me of that. I forgot the name of that thing. I think it's a type of zheng or something. But again, enough with the, oh, maybe this instrument is Chinese, maybe it's not. This track, with its splashes of organs towards the beginning, it really doesn't sound all that interesting to me. Even though this track is more focused, I really think the sound play on this track is certainly the most underwhelming. So yeah, overall, not much else to say. Again, it sounds like leftover for Cenizas. I really, really love Cenizas, okay? The sound play, the tones on that album is just yes. However, this is just very weakly strung together and not all that interesting sounding. It doesn't really create anything for me. So yeah, favorite track here is Telahumo, and my least favorite is Telallás, and I'm giving Nicolas Jaar's Telas a 6 out of 10. By the way, Cenizas is ashes and Telas is fabric, I think. So, ashes and fabric. So, have you listened to the latest Nicolas Jaar Ambient album? From 1 to 10, how much did you rate it? Like if you like it, and subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching. I will be reviewing the latest Leon La Havas, the latest Blue in Exile, the latest Logic, and Taylor Swift very, very soon. Very, very swiftly. Hey.